Matt McLennan is an executive vice president and shareholder at Kidder Matthews, full-service brokerage firm that covers various aspects of commercial real estate in the Seattle area. Matt describes how he transitioned from selling wine to selling buildings and how he found early success closing over 100 transactions within his first 3 years. Matt talks about the importance of a methodical approach to business and how he focuses on providing exceptional client service, leveraging organization, and tracking market data meticulously to ensure he can always provide the best value for his clients. We also discuss the challenges that are facing the office real estate market, particularly in Seattle, where high vacancy rates and looming debt maturity poses significant challenges in the near future. Here's my conversation with Matt McLennan. Enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Beyond Fulfillment Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Goulis, and this week, my guest is Executive Vice President and shareholder of Kidder Matthews, Matt McLennan. Welcome, Matt.
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me on. Glad to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much for taking the time. If you could, can you just tell us what you do at Kidder Matthews and how that came to be?
Absolutely. So Kidder Matthews, we're a brokerage firm through and through. I mean, that being said, we're a full service brokerage firm. So we do brokerage, property management, valuation advisory services, kind of cover everything under, call it the commercial real estate umbrella. For me specifically, I'm on the brokerage side, and my niche is working on industrial properties here in the Seattle Puget Sound region. That's the area that I work. But within that niche, I do leasing, sales, investments, ground up development, really anything that fits the industrial niche. And so, I'm sure most of your listeners are familiar, but think distribution centers, industrial manufacturing centers, industrial outside storage, yards. We're a port-driven market, so we have a lot of port-related activity related to containers and container storage and moving between the warehouses, transload, things like that. So, but for me, yeah, I mean, Kidder Matthews, I love my company. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm an owner in the company. We pretty much we're a West Coast-based company. We have about 20 offices along the West Coast. And so we serve all of the West Coast markets. A lot of our clients then go national, which we do that as well. But for me, Seattle's home, and this is where I work. And for the industrial market specifically, it's a great market. It's been really busy. It's been really robust for a while, and more notably in this past cycle, it's ramped up quite a bit. So yeah, keeps me busy. It's fun.
Okay. And how did you get into commercial real estate?
Oh, good question. For me, it was really kind of by happenstance. I was actually working for a wine distributor for many years, on the sales and management side. Loved that business. Great company. It was really good. I had some friends outside of work that worked for Kidder Matthews, and just in hanging out with them, and I learned about commercial real estate. I always knew about it, but I think most would agree, people who aren't in the commercial real estate space or maybe don't utilize commercial real estate for their business, it's kind of a mystical industry. Not a lot of people know and understand how it works, myself included. So I got exposed to it through some of these friends of mine, and it sounded really great. And for me, having the sales background, I mean, that's what I'm most interested in. I think that's where my skill set lends itself best. And so I saw myself, I could sell bottles of wine or I could sell buildings, and positioning to go sell buildings instead started to sound pretty good. So I just took the leap of faith and got a job at Kidder and started, day one in brokerage and just going out and hitting the market and building a book of business.
Okay. So it's a pretty drastic shift going from selling wine to selling buildings.
Yeah.
I read online too that you were honored within your first 3 years, you had closed over 100 transactions.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, anybody in brokerage will tell you that the first few years are without a doubt the hardest. I mean, you're out there learning your market, learning the buildings, learning the tenants, learning the owners, and also learning how to broker transactions, right? I mean, and so there's a pretty significant ramp up period. I think I was fortunate that the model that I followed, the kind of work ethic that I employ into my business every day allowed me to maybe ramp up a little quicker than most. Case in point, the transaction number and the deal volume that I've done. So yeah, I've been fortunate.
Okay. Well, and a lot of career salespeople work hard, and real estate especially, right? It's known for, you eat what you kill.
Yep.
Um, what would you say sets you apart in terms of like your system and the different things you do to amass that many transactions so quickly?
Good question. I think for me, I'm very methodical in the way that I go about my business. I mean, step one, you already kind of covered it. I think if you want to be successful in commercial real estate and brokerage specifically, you have to have a really strong work ethic. I mean, and when you think work ethic, it's like naturally you gravitate towards, are you working 40 hours a week? Are you working 60 hours a week or 80 hours, right? And as much as that's probably important, I think spending your time wisely is probably the largest superpower in commercial real estate brokerage, is figuring out how to utilize your time, because there's so many activities out there that can absorb your time, and some of them are necessary but not necessarily good uses of your time, right? So being able to manage that. And so for me, when it comes to the kind of pillar of my business is client service, and it's how do I take care of my clients, provide them the best service above and beyond what my competitors are willing to do. That's what steers my ship. And then within that, it's part of that, in my opinion, is being really organized and methodical in the ways that I go about servicing my clients. And so it has to do more with how I track the market, how I track data, how I share the data that I track with my respective clients when we're working on specific transactions. I mean, commercial real estate transactions in general are very nuanced. Everyone is different, and there are a lot of steps along the way in every transaction. When you buy a house, I mean, that's the most notable comparison, is doing a house real estate transaction. What do? You tour the house, you submit an offer, you go under contract, you do an inspection, you get your loan from the bank, you close, you're done. It's all done in about 30, maybe 60 days, right? It's very straightforward, and there aren't a whole lot of bumps along the way. Commercial real estate deals, all there are bumps along the way. It's figuring out how to overcome those obstacles. But part of that is making sure that deadlines don't get missed, certain boxes get checked. So I've built my own proprietary system within my software with my team. I have a lot of layers that kind of make sure that deals and transactions get done in a certain way, and I've seen the results of that have it's proven itself out, right? Not only are my clients really satisfied with the service and the way the transactions are performed, but then the success and the metrics of those transactions compared to what we see across the market, with some other types of deals. I mean, it's working. Took me years to figure out how to do it correctly and build the system, and it's still an ongoing, changing it all the time, improving it, right? But that's what worked for me. There's a million different ways you can do brokerage, but that's how I've done it.
Okay. And so, like you said, there's a lot of moving parts, a lot of layers, a lot of people you have to deal with. What is the typical sales cycle that you see if someone's looking to lease a commercial building?
So for leases, like in our market, most notably, we probably do on average 5-year lease terms. Sometimes we'll do less than that, 3 years. Sometimes tenants want to do 10-year leases if they know they're going to be in the building long term, or they're going to make a large capital investment into that building in order to justify the spend, right? So the answer your question on the sales cycle, I mean, it's usually plus or minus 5 years. So for me, it's figuring out, especially if a tenant has recently, whether it's an existing client of mine or a potential new client, if they've recently signed a 5-year lease and they're in that building for the next 5 years, right? Chances are they're probably not doing anything necessarily commercial real estate related. So for me, it's how do I stay in front of them? How do I add value in that 5-year span between, 5-ish years between leases, which admittedly is not an easy thing to do, right? I'm a service provider by nature, and when the service isn't necessarily needed for years at a time and everyone's busy, and these are usually CEOs of company, right? They don't necessarily look for or want Matt banging on their door every 3 to 6 months, right? With just information that they may or may not need at the time. So for me, it's important to make sure that my touches to my clients are intentional. It's providing them really valuable information, insights on the market that although they might not be ready to do a new transaction or do anything necessarily. It's still providing value to their business so that the next time we're ready to transact or do something together, they are informed, they're educated, they understand that I'm keeping an eye out for them and their business. I mean, that's what I'm there to do at the end of the day. So, but yeah, I
Okay.
mean, it's a long deal cycle.
Okay, and do you do that directly, like via like emails, that type of thing, like as far as staying in front of them with some value or some info regarding the market?
Yeah, I think every client is different, right? And these days in our day and age, I mean, digital mediums are arguably the easy button, right? Whether it's emails, text messages, social media. I mean, there's a lot of ways to keep in touch with people these days, but I bet a lot of that still, in my opinion, I don't think, despite where we're at in the digital age, that you can replace the human connection. So it's going to meet at their office, dropping things off, going to have lunch, catching up after work, whatever it may be. It's my driver of it is provide value, right? And then the secondary component is what's the best medium in order to provide this value. And so I don't limit myself to one medium, and most of my contacts are self-driven or self-done. I mean, I have a team with an admin that helps me. You know, these days there's AI and all these other automated tools that can help you reach out to your clients, and I certainly utilize those in the right instance, but most of my contact is still direct.
In my world, a personal brand is invaluable. A year ago, Easy DC was brand new with just a couple of customers and no online presence. Then I found Hicks Marketing. They helped me amplify my personal brand, build a solid content strategy, publish my podcast, and 10x the number of customers we serve, all in less than 1 year. Do you need a marketing partner who gets you and cares about your success? Reach out to Alicia at hicksmarketing.com for more info and tell her Dave Goulas sent you. Okay. And you mentioned the digital mediums and social media. So I was looking at your LinkedIn, and you do a lot of industry specific articles and information you put out, and thought leadership, so to speak. Like how important has that been? Is like the building a brand and offering that thought leadership. How important has that been to your career?
I think it's been very important and admittedly has had more impact than I anticipated when I decided to go down that road. I mean, I'll be the first to admit I'm not a big social media guy. In fact, on my in my personal life, I don't utilize it whatsoever. But for business, it's an opportunity to reach a massive audience in a much more efficient way, right? I mean, you have tens of thousands of millions of people out there on the internet every single day, right? And via your social media channels, that's a narrowed focus, and that chances are, if you've built it correctly, then your quote unquote following on your social media is your industry, right? Or people interested in your industry. So for me, I then parlayed that into what do people in my industry want to hear? What do my clients want to hear? And then what do my friends and families and other people that could ultimately provide, send business my way. I mentioned that commercial real estate is kind of a mystical industry. So for me, it's trying to demystify that, provide education on our industry, thought leadership, like you mentioned, educate both my clients and my friends on how our world works, right? How do lease transactions go? How do they get done? What are things to look for in buying a building when you're out there buying a building? If you want to buy land and build a building, what do you have to do, right? I mean, most people don't necessarily understand that. So I've kind of taken it upon myself to provide some of that information, mostly just as a big value add to my audience. And for me, the dividends that I've seen come out of that, I mean, it's hard to measure necessarily in that, oh yeah, I'm doing this many more transactions and this much more deal volume and all that. But the feedback that I've received since doing it from friends, family, colleagues, clients, all the above, I mean, I think everyone seems to enjoy and appreciate what I'm putting out there. So for me, it's become a pretty integral part of my business, and I think it's really important.
Okay. And what's the biggest challenge that you face in your business, like day to day, in terms of these deals and just trying to facilitate a transaction?
I think if you look at it every business, I mentioned that I work in the industrial space. That's my niche, more or less. Like I think about your business being a logistics company and doing third-party logistics for your customers. I mean, it's finding the right space in the right locations at the right times for the right price with access to labor, the correct transportation routes, the timing of which has to line up with your customers' needs. You have to at some point you have to structure your real estate transaction to be flexible with the business side of whatever you're doing, right? And those are just, the 6, 7 that I could come up with off the top of my head. When you really think about it, a commercial real estate space, I call it a warehouse space or whatever it may be, it has to there's a lot more to it than just a box. I mean, for it to serve the business correctly, it has to check a lot of boxes. And when we're in a tighter market or a market without a ton of available space, which is pretty much always the case here in the Seattle area, to find my clients space that checks as all or as many boxes as we can reasonably find for them to meet their business needs. I mean, that's really challenging. So I think for me, it's just the day to day. I have my book of business and my clients that expect certain things of me and have certain needs, and it's being able to bridge the gap between what the market actually has available and then giving them what they need. It's challenging to say the least. I mean, but that's what I'm hired for. That's what I'm paid for. That's why people come back to work with me is because is your ability to do that successfully, right? But it's a challenge daily.
Okay. And we talked a little bit before the show about some of these bigger spaces and companies having trouble if they've over capacitized and they have too much space trying to fill it up. I posted an article a little while back too that I saw because I post some real estate stuff too because it's relevant to my audience, where it
Yeah.
said industrial real estate building, now they're seeing the value in developers are building smaller spaces precisely for that reason, where it's much easier to sell them and get them filled up. I mean, are you seeing that in Seattle as well?
The answer is yes. So Seattle's a land constrained market. For those that don't know Seattle, that's probably the number one thing you have to understand is we don't have, like I think about where you're at in the Midwest, we don't have abundant land to build new buildings on. We find new land here and there, but we have to really stretch the boundaries, stretch the parameters, and get creative in order to build new buildings here in Seattle. With that in mind, because we don't have a lot of land, our land is really expensive when you buy it. And so if you're a developer and you have expensive land and construction costs are still at arguably historical highs, I mean, everyone's seeing some leveling off and some rebalancing, right? But generally speaking, the cost of construction is high. I think we all agree on that. So when you have high land costs, high construction costs, building the small buildings, the smaller warehouse spaces, and in my mind, small warehouse space is kind of 50,000 square feet and below. And there's really a strong niche of kind of the 5 to 20,000 square feet. Those buildings are very expensive to build. And so when you're a developer and you're looking to make a return on your money, right? That's why you're building the building as an investment. When your construction costs are as high and land costs are as high as they are, and then it's much more expensive to build small buildings than big buildings. Historically, we've seen most of the developers build big buildings instead of small. Now, all that being said, most of the tenant demand is still in the smaller space. Tenants need small spaces. There's more tenants in that arena than there are the tenants who need, call it over 100,000 square feet under one roof of warehouse space, right? So it's kind of an unbalanced supply and demand is that we have low supply of small space and high demand from tenants that want that space. When you can find it or when you can afford to build it because that you match up all the metrics to make it work, those spaces do really well. They lease at really high rates, they lease quickly, and they sell at, call it, top values. So there's a lot of demand for it. It's just for us specifically, it's hard to make those deals work just on a new construction basis.
Okay. And another thing that's been in the news a lot lately is with the office real estate market, with all the loans set to mature and so much of that industry being decimated with remote work and empty buildings and all that. How do you see that impacting the overall commercial real estate market?
I think for good, that is the $1 million question that we all want to figure out the exact answer to, right? That's a tough one. So Seattle's was especially downtown Seattle has always been a very robust office market. We have a lot of tech here. Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook. Amazon's headquarters have always been here, right? They have a huge office presence in downtown Seattle and some of the sister cities. And like most of the other major office markets post-COVID, I mean, we're probably in downtown Seattle right now, we're 30% vacant in office buildings, which is massive. And meanwhile, you have all this debt coming due, refinancing required, restructuring. And several of these buildings are worth half of what they were worth yesterday, which is um, detrimental to say the least to the ownerships of those properties, right? I I don't know where it's going. I don't see the office market recovering anytime soon, if ever, frankly. I mean, it's never going to go away, right? I mean, I'm sitting here in my office space. I can't imagine not working in an office. It's pretty mission critical for me. And there'll always be those businesses that I think are mission critical and have to work in office, but there's a lot that have figured out how to do without it, frankly. And so how is that going to impact and have a ripple on the greater market? For me, working in the industrial space, it doesn't really have a significant impact on my day to day, but a lot of the investors that I work with own industrial properties and office properties. And when you have losses on your office properties or just losses within your portfolio in general, what do you need to do? Typically, you need to shore those up, right? You need to make up for the losses. And so what do you do? I'm seeing several sell industrial properties that they own because they can still realize good value on their industrial properties to make up for some of the losses on their office properties. So that's one direct impact that I'm seeing. Um, I think from a tenant standpoint and from a business occupancy standpoint, one thing I haven't really seen teased out yet and proven, but I'd really like to see it. And I'd be curious, like with you running your business, what your opinion on this is. A lot of my clients just generally don't need office space for their warehousing operations. So what does that usually look like? It's a small office built out within their warehouse building that they occupy. They do their logistics out of the warehouse building, and then within that same under that same roof, they have a small office space that they house all their people in, right? Well, some of the larger companies, call it the ones that play across the country, right? They have these various warehouse spaces all in different markets, and then they might still have, call it a central headquarters, a big office in their home city, right? Do those companies still follow that model, or do they have more regional based offices within their own logistics warehouse spaces because they're already paying for that real estate anyway? And if most of their people can work remote and don't necessarily need to be in a corporate office, do they ditch the corporate office altogether? I mean, we've already seen a lot of the tech companies, a lot of the traditional office users who are exclusively office users ditch their office space. I'm wondering if the predominantly industrial companies, the industrial tenants who also utilize office, just also ditch office and go purely under warehouse. I don't know. I don't know the answer to the question. I still haven't really seen it play out. Um, but this whole office deal and the amount of debt that's coming due, I mean, it's going to have an impact. It's just hard to say definitively what it's going to be.
Sure. And I can totally see that happening too, right? Because in like a logistics or an industrial based business, it's, if you have the space, you could just find a way to utilize it and build out for offices with and be creative when it comes to, are we going to renew another big lease or just find a way to fold it into our other existing infrastructure? I mean, I think, especially within this economic climate, I could see a lot of companies doing that and getting creative just to cut that cost.
Well, you'd probably agree with me. I mean, your use of office, while necessary, I mean, clearly you're in there sitting in an office right now. It is 100% ancillary to your primary business. I mean, if push came to shove, you could probably set up a folding table in your warehouse and put your laptop on it, and you could still be functional and accomplish what you need to accomplish. Having the office as amenity, it's nice. It gives you a meeting place for your employees, but it's not mission critical. Whereas backtrack to pre-COVID with a lot of these businesses, the office was mission critical because we hadn't figured out remote work We hadn't figured out how to get creative with our use of office. That's what I believe has happened most since COVID is this whole everybody it forced us to get creative and figure out how to function and still run our businesses without the ability to get together in person, get together under one roof, have a central office space. And so we talk in real estate, especially on the brokerage side, about property product type fundamentals a lot. And while the economy might ebb and flow a little bit here and there, how does that affect the fundamentals of these various property types? I'd argue that the industrial market, specifically the niche that I work, the fundamentals haven't materially changed in several years and weren't affected necessarily by the pandemic. They were impacted, but they weren't changed by the pandemic. Office, the fundamentals have completely changed for all the reasons we just talked about. I mean, fundamentally, office space is completely different than it used to be, and so consequently, it's going to change. It's especially going to have. It's already changed. It's going to continue to change, and then it's really going to have to change when you take into account the financing component and all this debt and all these loans that are coming due.
Sure. Okay. Last question, and I saw this on your LinkedIn, and it looks like it was just posted the other day, but it was something you posted, and it was actually a note that your wife put in, I think your son's lunchbox, and it was something like you amaze me, and you just wrote a post about it in terms of the power of kind words, and even though it seems so simple, how far that can go in just making someone's day and helping them to brighten their day and inspire them. Can you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. Thanks for acknowledging that. It, I think we get so busy in our day-to-day activities and work and most of us, not everyone of course, but a lot of us have families at home and what are you going to work for, right? It's to provide for your family, try to provide for a better life for yourself, your family, future generations. I mean, you have everyone has different goals, right? But I just and I'm guilty of it 100%, right? I mean, I'm a very routine oriented person. It's kind of mission critical for my business. But that being said, that one had made me laugh because my wife does that every day for our oldest son, and it's awesome. I love that she does it. I see it on the counter every day, 9.9 times out of the 10. I see it out of the corner of my eye, and I just keep moving on with what I'm doing. And it just so happened yesterday when I put that out there on the internet that kind of caught my eye, and it reminded me to slow down a little bit, acknowledge the people that we care about, and really in a world where communication is so critical, right? The more you can communicate positively, and I think you'd probably agree with me, most of the world would agree, there's so much negative communication out there right now. There's so many people arguing all the time over politics and stances and the way things are going, right? And I don't need to go down the rabbit hole, but my point being is it's really easy to a lot easier than most think to try to put a positive spin on it. And especially for me, and you're in the same boat as me. I mean, I'm a service provider. I have clients and customers that I need to service. If I can put some of that positivity out there to them, it helps their customers. I mean, I'm not trying to sit here and be the champion of positivity necessarily, um but anyway, it just reminded me to uh look past all of our distractions that we see on a daily basis, and sometimes remember the small things. I think they go a long way.
Yeah, and I totally agree. And especially with the people closest to you, sometimes you can take it for granted, and just appreciating them and taking the time to make that kind word, just
Yeah,
yeah, highlighting the impact that it makes, I thought was great. And yeah, I really like that post.
yeah, thank you, appreciate that.
Okay, so Matt, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, talk real estate or whatever else it may be, what's the best way they can get in touch with you?
Yeah, great question. I shouldn't be too hard to find. My primary website it's my last name. It's mclennanindustrial.com. You can Google me. You can find, Kidder Matthews, my company. You can find me there. I'm very active on LinkedIn and most of the social channels. Anyone can my email and phone number are both available on all my pretty much any website that you can find me on. So just search for my name online and by all means, I mean, I encourage everyone. One of my favorite things about what I do, in addition to the transaction side of my brokerage business, is making connections, the networking, the education, and the thought leadership component, the kind of more intangible items. And so one thing I love doing when I do these podcasts is I typically get a couple people in various parts of the country that I know nothing about, and we might not even really have a good business connection, but have questions or are just interested in some of the topics we discuss. So I would really encourage any of your listeners to contact me, even if it's just to say hi. Always happy to lend some time and chat with people. So
All right. And we'll link all that in the show notes as well for everyone.
perfect.
All right. Well, Matt, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate that. And that's all the time we have for now. We'll see you
Yeah,
next time.
thank you. Thank you, Dave. Love what you're doing with your company. Love this podcast. I think you're on a roll. So keep doing what you're doing. It's been exciting to watch.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Take care.
You got it. Take care.